part about parenting is that we get to relive these stages of development. Parents had something going on and I didn't get to breathe into the fun part or the development part. And so there's this chance to really build that foundation.
How do we actually take the responsibility to make sacrifices to show up to become parents that actually have positive impacts in our children's lives?
I think a lot of challenge and, pain, suffering comes from the resistance to what is. I want to be cool still. I want to go do this thing and I want this and I want this. Because there was some part of me that made it satisfied or satiated earlier on in life. But I can tell you right now, when I surrender to what's happening in the present moment, which the present moment is making the peanut butter and jelly sandwich, or just hugging the tantruming child, instead of, that resistance to what is, and just surrender, me okay, I feel so much better as a parent or just as a human when I'm in service and being present to the moment and meeting the moment where it is.
Why is parenting a spiritual practice?
I feel like parenting is the ultimate spiritual pathway. I feel like there's so much richness in the opportunity. I mean, all relationships are reflection, right? To teach your kid how to move through their own challenges and work through their stuff and help them know that, and help them actually see and embody that being human is not to be perfect.
Jen Riley is going to be sharing with us about the parenting journey.
Or, oh, my mom didn't give me enough attention. All these things have impacts on us and they get frozen in our consciousness and they create stories.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Woven Wings Live, where we bring you wisdom and tools for vibrant living. I'm your host, Gabe Crane. I'm joined, as always, by my host, Rahul Didwania. And if you enjoy listening to us, please share with a friend or leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also follow along our journey by joining our newsletter, which is linked in the show description. And you can also check us out on YouTube. We're there, if you're not already, where you can see video accompanying the audio of this show. You can find all the links that you need for all of that in the show description. And so today we have a really special episode called Raising Wholeness, Parenting as a Spiritual Pathway. And our guest is wholeness coach for women, Jen Riley, who's going to be sharing with us about the parenting journey. And, as a parent myself, this is a topic that certainly hits close to home and really resonates. And Rahul, I know that, you're in a different phase of your own life with parenting and children. But I'm just curious, how does this topic land for you personally when you're thinking about parenting as a spiritual journey and really this idea of raising wholeness?
Yeah, thank you, Gabe, for introducing the episode. And as you said, I'm not a parent yet, but Kirti and I are excited to hopefully transition into that stage at some point in the near future. And, as we've gotten to get older, I think we're around parents a lot more. Just taking even Kirti as an example, her two siblings each have two kids, and we get to be around our niece and our nephews quite a bit. And it's an opportunity for me, I think, or has been an opportunity for me to really just be close to that parenting journey through both friends and family alike. And it's something I'm very, 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 very curious about, and just observing what it's like and the highs, the lows, the trials, the tribulations, the peak experiences and moments of joy, the whole rigmarole that we call parenting, I think is to me, for those that are lucky to have it, such a core part of, a human experience for whoever gets to go through it. And this idea of finding our own wholeness and having to grow through parenting is actually one of the reasons I'm most drawn to being a parent, and everything that comes with it. And I think a lot about when I was a child, I idolized being a kid and maybe didn't have full visibility into the complexity of being a parent. And I just think about it. I'm like, that was such a gift, from my parents to me. And as I've gotten older, seen other parents, but also had a chance to talk to my own parents about their own challenges and the growth and kind of their trajectory through that journey. I just appreciate it so much more. And I think with that, I'm excited to explore that. I don't know that we've done an episode on this topic so clearly, even though we've alluded to it a few times. And so I'm really excited to dig in, and especially with Jen, also to get into the side of being a mother, in particular. And I think for me and you, Gabe, as two men, we've had men on this show. I'm really excited to get in touch with a feminine perspective and to expand our knowledge, our awareness, through this conversation as well.
Yeah, amen to all that. I think that parenting just naturally puts us into touch with that sense of the broader life cycle. And as kids or as adolescents, or maybe just as we're going about our day to day, sometimes we don't think about life in that way. But, my parents were in town visiting us last weekend. And, what I find as I'm becoming a parent is it's changing. Of course, it's changing me, and my relationship with my son is ongoing. But what really stuck out to me is my relationship with my parents is changing, where I just, you were alluding to speaking to your parents as their adult child. You start to see everything differently than you saw it before, including the events of your own past. If I speak in the first person, my own experiences. So I had that experience, a certain experience of something as a child. But then now that I have the perspective of being a parent, then I'm looking back at that same moment in my own life from multiple vantage points, and I find myself thinking, okay, right. Like, so that was my experience then, but I'm having a different, now I've shifted over here and I see it from the perspective of my parents or from my older self. And just the kind of the miracle of life as it iterates itself, and we learn through that replication process that each time is unique and different. So that's one thing that comes to my mind. And with the men's work that I do on island on Maui here, a lot of that is around parenting and fatherhood. And a common refrain brought up there is role modeling. That we are, as parents, we are role modeling for our children. And I think I'm curious and excited to hear Jen's perspective on these things, because that role modeling is this kind of reflecting, this mirroring that we're constantly doing to one another all the time. And yeah, it just raises a lot of questions for me around how we can do that effectively. And then the last thing I'll say is that, as I've shared here and there, I think in other episodes, I'm currently going through a divorce. And so the effect that has on parenting, the change going on in our family away from the traditional nuclear family and into something that millions of people are grappling with and doing in all sorts of creative ways. But the layers of the effects that has on my son, first and foremost, and then on each of us, me and my wife, we're separating, how that change also affects our parenting journey. And so I think Jen has some perspectives on that as well. And I'm just excited to really get into all of this. So on that note, I do want to introduce Jen Riley. Jen is a mother, a podcast host herself, a leadership development facilitator, consciousness explorer, and wholeness coach to women, parents, and leaders. She helps her clients to build practices to move from their greatest capacity of love, embodiment, and presence through shadow work, filling out stages of development, helping build healthy relationships with the masculine and feminine. And there are links to her work, her programming, social media, and so on in the show description. So do check those out and see all the amazing things Jen is up to. But without further ado, Jen, thank you so much for joining us today and being on the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And it was lovely to kind of hear a little bit more about both of your journeys and where you are with parenting.
Yes. So maybe just starting there as you're sitting and listening to us kind of introduce the show, and relating to this question of parenting as a spiritual pathway. How do you make sense of all this as a broad, top line? Why is parenting a spiritual practice? How is it? And yeah, what's a angle or lens into this whole topic that we can begin with?
Thank you. I feel like parenting, maybe I'm biased, but I feel like parenting is like the ultimate spiritual pathway. I feel like there's so much richness in the opportunity. I mean, all relationships are reflection, right? But there's something special about the child. I think there's just like the fact that they're growing up and going through these stages of development and going through like the same stages that we forget, that we've forgotten. And we have, I think, so many people today, and maybe this will be different someday, which I think about sometimes, but there's so much like unresolved trauma, lowercase t trauma. Like, I feel like everyone has some level of like lowercase t trauma of like, oh, the bully, or oh, my mom didn't give me enough attention. Like, all these things have impacts on us and they get frozen in our consciousness and they create stories that are then informing us as adults. They create these patterns. And I think everyone can relate to having some kind of pattern of whether it was like, oh, my boss doesn't give me the attention that I need, or, I feel like I'm pushing the cart up the hill, or, oh, I dated somebody that like, again, is like, creating some kind of scenario. So we all have these patterns that are showing up in our life, and a lot of them stem from these childhood experiences where our amazing little like 7-year-old brain like concocted some kind of story to protect ourselves. It's like incredibly powerful. But the part about parenting is that we get to relive these stages of development. And the child is created in a way where, they're in theta waves until they're like, their brain is in theta waves until they're 7 or 8. And so they're in this space where they're literally just absorbing everything that we do. They're absorbing everything consciously and unconsciously. And co-regulation is so powerful. Like I heard you talking about role modeling. Role modeling is like, it's not even just the action, it's the embodiment. It is the embodiment of how we are moving through, because it's our nervous system that is co-regulating with the child. And that co-regulation is actually creating an imprint, a template in their nervous system of how they are informed of how to move through something. So even if you're like, oh, I was really good and I didn't like have an outburst, but I was still stressed because I had people coming over and I wasn't ready yet, and I'm still stressed, and that stress is in my body. Well, that's the child feels that in their nervous system. They need us for co-regulation. And they're designed that way because their nervous system is developing until they're in their mid-20s. And so they have this very plastic system that's absorbing all of our stuff. But because they're absorbing all of our stuff, they are also reflecting back all the conscious and unconscious stuff that we have maybe paid attention to, maybe tried to deal with, maybe haven't dealt with yet. And often parents can get really triggered by that. But it's beautiful because if you look at parenting as a spiritual pathway, sorry, long-winded, coming full circle. If you look at parenting as a spiritual pathway, it's like, then you're kind of almost getting like a second chance. You're getting a chance to, really see your childhood in this way, or like see the parts of yourself, like going through each stage of development and being like, okay, like, so my child's acting in this way. It's reminding me of these stories of myself. And if you actually, go inward and look inward in those moments, you get a chance to fill out your development in a way that like, really, you get to like relive these. And maybe part of it's not even just the parts that like maybe need the rehealing, But part of it is just like maybe my parents had something going on and I didn't get to like breathe into the fun part or the development part. And so there's this chance to really build that foundation up that's been creating some of these patterns in our adult life. And so I feel like, and there's so much more, but that's kind of like the big picture of the child is designed to absorb our conscious and unconscious behavior, and they're reflecting it back to us. And so we can now look at every challenge, every, tension point with the child as, oh, this is actually just illuminating something in me that needs a little bit of attention, instead of, oh my God, my child just isn't being respectful, or whatever the scenario is. There are lots of stories of like how it's just hard, but it's really just a deeply humbling experience. And it's been, and it can be fun. I feel like that's the thing. It can be really fun.
What I really want to highlight, Jen, in what you said, right, is you just mentioned that there are all these stories about how parenting is hard. If you're around some tired parent, especially when the kid's younger, they've been running around, they're drained, you might miss some of the things that you're talking about in the way that somebody talks about, a parent might be talking about their experience. And I think the part I really want to highlight in what you said is it feels like the task of turning it into a spiritual pathway maybe needs some like intention behind it. I don't know if that's true, if you agree with that or not, but there's probably a default level of spiritual development and growth that just happens by nature of being a parent. But I feel like the additional piece of actually looking at those reflections, like paying attention to them, introspecting, and using that as an opportunity to examine our own stories, that's not something that I feel like every parent does. And I'd be curious, what your point of view on that is. And the one other piece I'll just put out there before asking the question is, something I've seen with a lot of parents is I think because of that connectedness that you're talking about, the co-regulation, I feel like that creates the foundation for there to be like a higher calling, right? Where you have the responsibility of being a parent, of nurturing, first keeping this child alive, but then nurturing this child through the stages of development. And what I see with a lot of parents is this beautiful higher purpose that emerges from that. And that responsibility drives them to grow, to actually go through that reflective process, to actually see the places where, they might be falling short of their own standards of what, who they want to be. And, but again, not all parents, I think, approach it that way. And so my question for you is, one, do you agree with this characterization? And two, like, what makes for that different experience? What makes for one set of parents maybe engaging with it in a more quote unquote spiritual way and being on that path versus another set that might be more mired in the complexity, and the quote unquote negative side of the parenting journey?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think there's a lot. So there's a lot of complexity that goes into that. And I think part of it is, at least in America, we are a country founded on independence, major value of independence. And independence has really, I think, spurred a deeper wound in our culture of isolation. I think the real goal would be interdependence. But now we have all these families and systems that are, really spread out. There's a lot, and especially in the single parenting world, which I'll just name, I am a single parent, have been for 5 years. I hear you, Gabe, on the divorce and the changes in the consciousness there. Mm-hmm. But there's like a whole thing about like, I can do it myself. And I gotta, and look at all the things that I can do by myself, and in this like holding it all in. And I think that has a big implication on the parenting role, because it is a 24/7 job. It's hard. There's so many stories in the culture, I think, that go against what would be natural in parenting. There's a great book, Hunt, Gather, Parent, I highly recommend. And it kind of talks about some of the more indigenous cultures and how the community is supported to care for children and to support the parents to care for the children. And that's really lacking. And I feel like I think that that's maybe one of many narratives that is supporting the negative view of parenting because it's so hard. Yeah, it's really hard when you're doing it alone. It's really hard when you have the schedule super packed. It's really hard when we're trying to uphold certain mortgages and paying for everything and now, because we're paying for everything, we're not able to be with the child, like the child's, in the daycare and the things. And people have to make these choices. They have to do it. But at like what cost? It's like, and it's so common. It's like, oh, of course, like in America, it's like, of course, you put your child in daycare at 3 months. I remember when I became a mom, my spiritual journey was very much so like awoken from having a child, but I had like no clue. I had no friends that had kids. And I remember thinking like, oh yeah, 3 months, everybody puts their kid in daycare. The child must be ready. And the child was like so fragile, so delicate. And I just felt like this really deep yearning in me of like, oh my God, like it just didn't feel right in my body to do that. And it's so common and it's so confusing, like as a mom who doesn't have, didn't have a lot of eldership to support, like, hey, listen to your body, like listen to the wisdom of your body, like, always attuned to the child. Had to kind of figure that path out on my own. And I just feel like, yeah, parenting's really, really hard when your body and the nature of raising children is going completely against what the narratives are in our culture. And then you tack on the lack of support in that, and you're dysregulated, you're tired, you're, burnt out. Of course, parenting's going to be hard. And then add on, even on top of that, like all the shadow and stories and negative self-talk and limiting beliefs that have to do with, well, I can't ask for help. Or if I ask for help, I got to ask for the bare minimum because I don't want to be too much. And think about how many of those narratives are going on. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I really like where this conversation is going. And I appreciate your question, Rahul, because it popped me out of my own echo chamber of, the parents that I talk to or that I've met in a parenting class that I went to, or because I work as a coach and in the helping professions, there's a lot of emphasis on, I guess, what I broadly call like conscious parenting or being actively invested as a parent and treating that as a learning opportunity. But your question kind of brings me back to, how do we get to that starting line to begin with? And it makes me, you use the word humility, or that parenting is a humbling process, Jen. And it makes me think about sacrifice. We talk about parenting as a spiritual pathway, and we often think about like sacrifice as a process, as a part of spiritual development. And should parents make sacrifices for their children? I mean, I think that might sound like an obvious thing, but I had a client that I was speaking with actually today who is soon to be a parent, and we were talking about we were talking about just social lifestyle, basically, and drinking, partying, and socialization. And I know that in the first few years of my life, or of being a parent, I mourned and felt that isolation you're speaking to, where I felt like I really lost that suddenly. It also was COVID. We moved to Maui. It was suddenly a very different environment. But suddenly I didn't have the social world that I was used to. And now I've kind of made peace with that, where it's like, well, I don't do that in the same way as I used to, but I'm a parent, and like life is kind of different now. And it's kind of a classic getting older story, or getting old. And, you kind of laugh about it. And it's like, well, I'm now an old person and I don't do any of that. Or I do a lot less of it. And yet at the same time, when I think about the parts of me that resist that don't want that, or when I look out and I see certain models of parenting where I feel like the parents are, and this can be me at different times, just to be very clear, but the parents are a little bit absent-minded, or they're a little bit frustrated about having to be a parent to begin with. And kids are super cute, and they're spiritual, transformative experiences, but they could also be really annoying sometimes, depending on your mood. And you talked about trauma and these kind of layers of experience that shape how we even show up as parents. But if we find ourselves sometimes in that camp, or if you're listening to this and you're kind of can relate to some of what I'm saying, but obviously if you turn this podcast on too, you're interested in spirituality, mindfulness, a growthful life. How do we actually take the responsibility to make sacrifices to show up to become parents that actually have positive impacts in our children's lives?
I don't know. Have you figured out the answer to that one yet?
No, that's why you're the guest. But I'm asking you to give us the wisdom, because well, I mean, one thing I will say is that I love what you say about humility, because I feel like resistance gets me in trouble, and so it's when the best moments, I think, for me have come when I've just been able to lie down on the mat, so to speak, and just be like, all right, God, all right, life, like, what do you want me to do? Okay. Like, make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Okay. Go for a walk, like, don't worry so much about myself. Don't worry about the activities that I wanted to do. And through that, getting that's difficult, even humbling, but humiliating at the same time. But then something fills me up on the other side of that, where I feel full of love. I feel full of life, like, wow, I get to make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Like, how amazing is that,
I love what you're talking about with it. For me, that's surrender. I think a lot of challenge and, pain, suffering comes from the resistance to what is. And I think that there's two things at play when I hear what you're talking about. And I don't think that there's one clean answer, but just talking in generalizations and themes. One, I think that maybe there's it has to do with initiations, and I'll speak more for female initiations. Coming into maidenhood is not something that I'm hoping there's a revival actually happening right now. But it typically, there has been a lost in the guidance of young women into maidenhood. And I'm guessing that that's also true for men, that there's not a lot of initiation into manhood. And what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to step into your womanhood, to be exploring your passions, exploring, taking care of yourself? Maidenhood is supposed to, be a time of our life where we're learning how to self-regulate and care for ourselves. So at the time when we have children, we're able to take care of someone else because we've already learned how to care for ourselves. And I think what we're finding in culture right now is we haven't really learned, what taking care of ourselves really means. We've kind of gotten away from really listening to the wisdom of our body, and kind of getting lost in the checklist of do I have the stuff, or did I do the life, or am I? And I think at the end of the day, so there's a piece of just like our maturation in the world. And then I think there's another piece of just like surrendering to like what is. Because I can tell you, I've done that too. I've absolutely gotten in my head. It's an ego state. It's a part of my ego that's like, I want to be cool still. I want to go do this thing and I want this and I want this. Because there was some part of me that maybe
100%.
get satisfied or satiated earlier on in life. But I can tell you right now, like when I surrender to what's happening in the present moment, which the present moment is making the peanut butter and jelly sandwich, or just like hugging the tantruming child, instead of, that resistance to what is and just surrender, me like, okay, like I feel so much better as a parent or just as a human when I'm in service and being present to the moment and meeting the moment where it is.
So it sounds like, Jen, what you're starting to introduce is something you've alluded to a couple of times, which is this idea that we're coming in with shadows, right? And shadows, stories, narratives, things that are embedded in us, right? And they might be informing the way that we're acting or the way that we're feeling in any particular situation. And that, and shadow, I think, tends to have a negative connotation. But would love to have you just first just share, like, what are shadows? For those that aren't familiar with that concept, what is shadow work, and how does that inform, the few different things that we've started to talk about, right? Which is surrendering, not being resistant to what we're experiencing, conscious parenting as a concept, being, wholly committed to a process of reparenting ourselves, et cetera, et cetera. What are shadows and shadow work? How does that connect to all this?
Oh, thank you. I love that. Yeah. Yeah. Shadow work. Yay. Shadow work. I love shadow work. I would say nobody really like it. So typically shadow kind of comes from Carl Jung's work. So if anyone's listening and is like, what is this shadow work? Google it, check it out. Like, I want to be a fan of supporting people finding that in their own path. But the shadow is kind of like the aspects of ourselves that we don't see, and typically are parts of us that maybe we don't like or don't want to admit. Like, it's like, I don't want to admit that I get really jealous, or I have a part of me that like is really, maybe really hurt, by something. And I'm just like, and acts out when it's hurt. And some of typically these shadows create patterns in our lives. And it takes maybe several iterations of this pattern. Have you ever had like a pattern that's like, it's like, oh, that's happening and I feel uncomfortable? Or if you get really triggered, like that's like another way to kind of start to illuminate these shadows and bring them out. Like, oh, it's like, oh, like this, I had this conversation with my boss and I got so triggered. Or my child wasn't listening to me and I got so triggered. It's like, oh, like, so these are how we start to illuminate. And I got really mad and I snapped, right? Like we all kind of, I think everybody's done something like that. I think it's really part of our human experience, is that there are parts of ourselves that we don't want to admit that we have. And so that's why we call it the shadow, because it lives like in the shadowy parts of our subconscious. And part of, especially for people like parents, and I think this is really big right now, is like we want to break cycles. I want to be a cycle breaker, break those generational cycles. I think shadow work is like a really great way to start to bring that in, because you start to take these parts of ourselves and bring them into the light. And I mean, so part of why I love shadow work too is because not only are we bringing them into the light, we're bringing them into, so this is where the wholeness part comes in, right? Because we're taking parts of ourselves that are, we might have said like, oh, I don't really want to admit that, or even acknowledge that this part happens, and so we're taking those in and just saying like, you know what? like, this is just, and this is part of like parenting as a spiritual pathway and the humbleness and the whatever, because it's like, instead of just being like, ooh, I snapped at my kid and now I feel so bad and I'm just going to like feel really bad that I did this thing and I swore I'd never say the thing that my mom said to me and now I did it and I feel awful. It's like, cool. Guess what? That's part of being human. You're most like every parent, I think, is going to do that. But instead of like feeling bad and beating ourselves up, it's just like, this is just another space for us to do some shadow work or do some inner work or whatever the process is, and like bring that into the light and start to like work with it, get curious about it. And I really believe that this is how we build unconditional love in ourselves. Because I think there's a lot of like, as a parent, you want to like give your kid unconditional love. And it's like, if you can't show yourself unconditional love, it's going to be really hard to role model unconditional love and to really have that unconditional love show up with our kids. So I feel like this aspect of working with the shadow and loving the parts of ourselves, being curious, assuming positive intention, are ways that we are really starting to build that, reparent ourselves and embody unconditional love and have the embodiment of unconditional love. I can't tell you how many times I've done shadow work and then noticed how I show up with my child with like, immense more compassion, or my mother, like it's deeply helped my relationship with both of my parents in a way that it's like dissolved this like image that I thought that they should be perfect parents. And I've actually been able to like really just see them for the humans that they are. And I've built that unconditional love in me because we always have access to that, but we forget that. So.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Jen. It brings me back to what I was commenting on just at the beginning of the show of like seeing a childhood moment, then from a different perspective. As a child, I wanted my parents to behave this way. Now, as a parent, I'm like, oh, I understand why my parents behaved that way. And oh, look, there I did it. And then, so it's like I'm kind of getting multiple points on the circle, I guess. Like it's more of a 360 view. So I kind of connect that with wholeness. I'm curious if you can speak to this feeling or this experience of unconditional love a little bit more and just make that connection for people around the link between wholeness and that love. So we have the shadow, we have light, we add them up together, we get this sense of wholeness. But why does that connect with love? And how do we feel that a little bit more if that's something that we don't quite know what that is?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I feel like this is a real game changer, I think, for the parent that wants to do the inner work. Is like when you notice these shadowy parts, is to hold them with love. And like as we're holding them with love, and we're being curious, right? Like love is seeking to understand. And so there's this welcoming these parts of myself in and saying like, okay, like sometimes for someone who, I would say almost anybody that I've worked with, like we can tap, like everyone that I've worked with can tap into a level of unconditional love. Like if it's not like what their parent would have said to them in that moment, when we find those like younger parts in us that are like still scared or still sad or still angry, it's like, what would unconditional love say to that younger part of you? And so when we start to like identify, so through shadow work, through being triggered as a parent or just in the world, we use those as like gateways into identifying the younger parts. And as we see these younger parts of us, we reparent them with unconditional love. Like, what did you need in that moment? Like, what would unconditional love have said to you then? And so if you have a moment, just like, or even just a tough day, at the end of the day, really tough day, and you're like, have that inner critic going and you're kind of like giving yourself the like, oh God, you should have done X, Y, and Z better. Pause and just think like, what would unconditional love tell me right now? Can
Yeah,
you really?
what I love about what you're saying, Jen, is that if I'm understanding it correctly, is the unconditional love is intrinsic, right? It's there, it's independent of anything that's outside of us. This is a theme that Gabe and I have talked about a lot, both on the show, but also when Gabe was actually my coach and we were working together. This idea that actually internally, right, you can basically bring out any sort of love, compassion, any of these qualities. You can bring them out because they're there. They're already there. And if you can kind of engender a state change that follows from bringing that out, the entire situation in front of you and your relationship to it changes, right? And what I'm hearing in this particular context is kind of summarizing everything is like parenting gives us all these opportunities, all these situations, all these moments to have to channel it or have to learn to channel what we want to channel. And have to maybe is not even the right word. It's just an opportunity to do so. And maybe we sometimes do, sometimes we don't. All of that's okay. But if we can come in and be conscious to it and reflect on it, that is the spiritual pathway, right? And it gives us all of these moments and opportunities to practice bringing that out from within for ourselves, for others, and then that higher purpose of parenting, that responsibility of, hey, if I can do this for myself, my child is going to benefit, gives us sort of a drive and impetus to really to really pursue that path, to embody all these different qualities that we're talking about. Does that track kind of the way you're looking at it here?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I think like two things. Like one, I deeply believe we all came from infinite love, and love is abundant in the universe. And when we are born into the world, it is our like purpose to remember that love. And our parents become templates of how we relate to love through the divine masculine and the divine feminine. We in these flavors, like our mother and our father become these like kind of imprints and templates of like how we relate to the divine feminine and the masculine energy. And we get frustrated, or we have these moments where we're like, oh, like they should have been there for me, I needed them, and it's like, and they weren't, and I'm hurt, and I'm going to carry this hurt forever. But we're comparing our parents to that unconditional, like the reason we have a reason to be like, why wasn't it better? Because I think everybody could say like, well, this could have been better, well, that could have been better, because like we have that imprint of unconditional love in us. So we all have access to that. That is a part, like intrinsically a part of us. So that's like one part. The other part is that that you mentioned was practice. Like parenting is a practice. Like every day it's just like going to yoga. It's like getting on the mat. Some days I'm a little more wobbly and I can't hit those balance poses, and other days I'm on it, And it's a practice. Every day is another chance to look at those as opportunities. And some days I'm just happy to just get through the day. And that's okay.
And the piece no, absolutely. And the piece I want to ask you, Jen, is actually around that, the first piece you mentioned around the imprint, right? That we have that imprint of unconditional love. For someone that's listening to this and they're like, okay, that sounds great. Like, that sounds kind of inaccessible. Like, what does that really mean? It's like a new idea to them. How do you get in touch with that imprint? Or what do you do with your uninitiated clients that you're trying to bring to that place, right? What does that look like?
That's a great question. Everybody kind of finds their own way. But I guess it's like in those moments where we're like, what do I do? Like, what do I do with this? My child is like this, or my mother came to visit me and she's doing all these things that I don't want her to do. And I want to just scream at her, and it's like, okay, like, well, what would unconditional love say to you in that moment? So I really just try to invite it. And sometimes it takes like the co-regulation of like being like, for the person that's like, that is really out there. And like, I don't know if I can really get in touch with that. Maybe that's something, that you can do together with someone, whether it's a coach or guide or someone, but like there's, even just like a meditation practice that you can, work on in the morning. But there's almost like a co-regulation that can help support the nervous system. Because a lot of times it's like those moments that we're getting really dysregulated, right? Because we're reliving something that put us into that flight, or freeze, fawn or fix, or whatever, all the F's, moments. And so it's really overwhelming to the system. And it's in those overwhelming moments that we like needed the co-regulation that we didn't get at the time. And so those are the moments to like reparent and be gentle with our nervous system.
So I'm curious to take our conversation a little bit into the realm of motherhood specifically, Jen, because that's a lot of the work that you're doing with women. And maybe as a specific entryway is just looking at this shadow and this shadow work and thinking about how that specifically ends up showing up in certain cases within the experience of motherhood. And I think that's probably helpful for us, for everyone listening, whether you're a mother or not. It's an opportunity, I guess, to learn about the experiences of motherhood, but it's also just generally a way for us to gain greater insight and examples of how this process actually plays out.
I so appreciate that, because I feel like this space is like so messy. It's so complex. There's so many layers to it. And I keep like, the more I'm steepening into motherhood, both in my experience and with my clients, it is just like, man, it is messed up. And I just want to be I'm really dedicated in my work right now to being like a massive compost heap for women and for motherhood. Like, we are going to compost these stories that we've created from our culture, from whatever, so that we can kind of come back. Like my ultimate goal in like feminine wholeness is like for women to feel like amazing when they are listening to the wisdom of their body. I find specifically for women and for mothers. And I think that part of it's developmental, like part of it's societal, part of it is our biology. So an example is when a girl's born, women, young girls are born different wiring than young men. So like a lot of this is in our biology. Women are born to like study people's faces, to make eye contact. They're seeking that eye contact in that relationship more so than a boy is. And I'm saying this is with typical hormonal, whatever has happened to their brain, the typical development. And so part of this is like, we could say is people pleasing. Like right off the bat, a woman is kind of like being in relationship, in harmonious relationship is really important to a young girl, and less important to a young boy. There is something about feeling safe and feeling cherished. And at any point in any child's life, if there's stress, it will delay executive function. It'll delay the development of the prefrontal cortex. It will delay the development of the nervous system. Women and the way stress impacts men and women are different. Like men will actually, like some level of competition will like give them a little bit of a boost at certain ages. For women, it can be like very confrontational, and they're scared that they're going to lose the relationship. Talk about abandonment wounds, right? We like everyone, men and women have abandonment wounds, but there's a certain level that women biologically are more prone to. And so as I've been looking at like the shadows of the feminine, I find like some of them are actually built off of like people pleasing, like some of this is actually built off of our biology, because that is the same skill that helps us discern if a man is going to be a good mate or not. It's like, that's the same skill of like studying your facial expression and being like, is he lying? Does he like me? I can't tell. I don't, and so like there's a level of discernment. So there's kind of like this biology that's happening that I want to like make more space in the female field for like the of courseness. And also as we're like raising young girls, because all this stuff starts early, like to just like young women, like young girls need to be cherished, and to feel really safe and to have lots of eye contact and presence. Whereas like a young boy will be like, he'll be looking around the room. It'll be a totally different thing. It's like, okay, mom's here, cool, but I want to like go and explore more. And then like, that goes through different, initiations and grows up. I mean, part of women too, it's like, so there's the biology impact, then there's like the impact of like the feminist movement. And we have this whole flipping thing that's so convoluted around like, in the name of equality. In the name of equality, I need to like be a mother. So like when a mother comes into motherhood, you go through, actually at every female initiation, this includes infantile puberty, which is 6 months to 2.5. This also includes regular puberty, it's a 20, every single time. And when she has a child, there's a 24-month period where a woman's nervous system is going through a synaptic pruning. So they're literally throwing out connections of the brain that are not going to serve her in the next stage. So just literal connections are just getting slaughtered, thrown out. And new ones are being made to make more, usually for more empathy or more connection or more communication. For motherhood, it's specifically for that empathy with the child. And so that woman is literally not the same person. It won't be the same person again. And most women, you've heard of like mom brain, and they're in this brain fog, and their brain is the most plastic it will be in their adult life. So, when we think about the child growing and supporting their nervous system and not being under a lot of stress, the mother equally needs this level of like, again, this cherishment, this support, so that she can not it's like having a concussion. Like if you get a concussion, it's like, don't overload your brain. So your brain has the chance to rewire itself and heal. Well, like when we go through this motherhood and this postpartum phase, and then think about how prevalent it is in social media, in women now, to have these like really challenging postpartum periods. It's like they're supposed to go back to work. They're supposed to be, in the name of equality, I need to keep my job. If I don't get back in there, I might lose this opportunity, then a part of myself, but they're not the same person. We're not supporting women. So there's like, but there's that whole narrative in the structural system that we live in today, in the culture, is creating this like total like disconnection between the wisdom of the body and what the woman's going through. So it's like a massive gaslighting that's like happening to women. Like, oh no, you need to get back because you have your job. Or like, oh no, like it's just brain fog, but you're fine. And it's like we need to like care for women more. It's not equal. So there's like these shadows and things that are happening. And what's happening is like women are afraid to ask for help. They're wanting to people please. They're wanting to make things, they want to be thankful that we have our jobs, but it's at the same time, it's like, I'm told I need to check off all these lists. Oh my God, I could go on and on about this, but it's like all the like pediatric like checklists of like, well, you should be feeding your child at this time, and they need to be able to sleep train at this time. That all came out of like the industrialization of hospitals, and is based off of these like old pamphlets. It's like not, I believe there is more ease. I'm not saying motherhood is easy, but there is more ease and grace and joy when we are attuning to the wisdom of our body and attuning to the child. And we have the space and the support and the freedom to do that. And I will say, that space and support and freedom to do that is not as ample as it needs to be.
Yeah, wow. I mean, Jen, there's just so many layers, right? Going all the way from the system that we're in, the economics, the financial considerations, the social changes, the idea of rights and equality, all of these things that are playing into this. And as you were talking about it, I was just trying to think about my own relationship to some of these things, and I was just thinking about a number of my female friends or my wives of some of my friends who have had kids and have gone back to work, like you said, in very short periods of time, not really had even late stage pregnancy. They're basically going to work until, they've had the kid. And, what I was noticing within myself is anytime I've seen that, I've been both like in just complete awe and like, just like, this is one of the things I'm like, man, as a man, I will never understand that. And man, do we have it easy? I mean, men have their own challenges, of course, but I was like, it's just like, it's truly just, there's no other way for me to put it than like truly mind blowing for me to observe, like mothers and women go through this. And the part that I think I've just tuned into for the first time today is, for example, a friend of mine who's a doctor, it's like she had 6 weeks, maybe, or no, not even 3 weeks, maybe. I think it was like something that was just like ridiculous, and the part that I'm noticing is I was like, oh, actually, in the way that I've talked about it or related to it, and our group has talked about it and related to it, it's been like admiration, right? Rather than just like, alongside shock and awe and like whatever. But the thing that I think I'm noticing is admiration, almost in the sense of like idolizing it. Like, wow, like you're such a superstar that you're able to do this, while almost, and I wonder now, I almost want to go back to her and be like, by viewing it that way and by casting it that way, I wonder if it removes the space to acknowledge how crazy that is something that she had to do, or that many people have to do, and that is the way that we approach this, as a society. And to relate it to something even more personal, my wife and I just recently, navigated a couple of miscarriages, and I was, she and I have been connecting on this quite a bit lately, and she has mentioned this idea already, and the synaptic pruning concept is really sticking with me, where she has said, she's like, I am already someone inherently different than who I was before going through these things. And I think she hasn't even fully figured out what that means yet, but it's just like, she's like, yeah, she's like, I'm just different, and it feels fundamental. It feels very deep. And relating to what we were just talking about, I was like, we have not had any space to, or rather, she has not had any space or been granted any space to even explore that. It's like, it's in the gaps of the day to day, in the gaps of her busy job and our committed full lives and all these other arenas, that she's trying to find space, or maybe not even trying, but like finding some amount of space, to connect with this. But it's so limited, and so yeah, I don't know, just taking all this in, I'm just further appreciating the complexity, the female experience, going through the journey of early motherhood and in all stages of motherhood for that matter. And also feeling a little bit of this, like, just like, like, how is this the system that we operate in? And I'm curious, taking it all in, like, how do you relate to this whole complexity? What do you advise, people that are going through this? If we view some of the realities as fixed, right? Like, hey, it is expensive to exist in this day and age. We do often have, certain constraints or certain things that drive us into some of these situations that we're talking about. What do we do with all this? How do we relate to it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the biggest thing is I think most people don't know. Like most women don't know what they're really going through. They know they have brain fog. They know it's really hard. They know that they want to do something. They know that they've lost themselves and they have no idea how to like cobble the person that they are now back together and what that's going to look like. I mean, like motherhood just completely rewires their body. And I don't think most women know that that's part of, I think it's like, at least I'll speak for myself. Like it was mostly like, okay, I'm going to have the child. And then once I have the child, I'll kind of be back to normal. And it's like, nope, that's like so far from true. I mean, and I think about, I mean, like this might be an overshare, but I was like passing massive blood clots, up to like 6 weeks past, my birth. And I'm just like, and I had a pretty easy birth. So I just feel like, okay, so first of all, I feel like there needs to be more education and just awareness of like what's actually happening. What's the impact of what's happening? Because part of the impact is the ability to create space and I'll just say lessen the stress as much as possible for a woman to rewire in those 2 years is going to set her up for her motherhood journey in the best way possible. If we put stress on her in those first 2 years of motherhood, like extra stress other than the child not sleeping at night, that's just going to make that rewiring phase not as complete or as whole as it could be. So there's like having a really real hard conversation with your partner and with your community and forming that community of like, so there's like, for the people who haven't had kids and are thinking of having kids, like have some really hard conversations about like, what is the first 2 years going to look like? And how are we going to support ourselves so that we can have a break here and there? Do we live near Nana? Or have we cultivated a really good support system? Can we afford to have like a nanny on, come in? Can I afford to take a year off? Can I, as like a woman, like, can I maybe go back part-time? Like, I think that's great. Like if you have the option to do some kind of part-time work for the first years, and I realize that not everybody has that option, but I just want to invite like being really creative and really thinking about like what could we change? Does that mean we have to move in with my parents to like make something I mean, like get really creative. Like, how can I make this possible? Because the first 2 years of the child's life, that first stage of development is where they are being informed of all their attachment styles, of how they think of trust in the world. Like that first stage of development, their nervous system, like they need mom. They need mom to be close and like in that connection. And they need dad to like run the perimeter and protect mom and to help create that space for mom. And so like it needs everybody. And like, yeah, there's so much cool stuff about like, because like even the oxytocin, like that impacts a woman, builds this like really empathetic bond with the child. And oxytocin in a man will actually spur his like playfulness. And the child needs both, because like when that playfulness comes on, it helps break that separation from mom a little bit. But those first 2 years are just like so crucial to like a child feeling really safe in the world, like safe with their parents, like safe that they can trust that their needs will be safe. It informs this. So there's like, for the parents who are planning, have some really hard conversations. For the parents who have done this and are like, shit, I went back to work, or I went, and I didn't get to do that, or I didn't get to tend to my nervous system. You can always like repair. Okay. And you can always like support yourself. So there's supporting yourself, and then there's supporting the child. So if the child didn't get like that full breadth of development, They might regress down in stages of development, like especially when they're dysregulated. They might go down. They might just need to be held more, literally held like a baby. And I'll give an example. I went through a divorce. Sometimes when we do the exchange, my daughter, it's just dysregulating, and she has a moment of needing to kind of come back into the space. And she's really dysregulated in that time. It's the only thing that really supports her. It's she's going all the way back down to that first stage of development. And she just needs to be held like a baby. And just I feel there's a level of grace of knowing that the child is going to fluctuate between stages of development. I think learning the stages of childhood development I would just implore every parent to learn about stages of development, because it can be really helpful about recognizing where your child is and recognizing that your child is fluctuating. And just noticing if they're regressing down, that it's not a good or a bad or in anything. It's just just meet your child where they're at. If they're regressing down a level, they need to be, held in that space more. And then they'll come right out of it, so just so there's a piece of that. And then there's just a piece for women. And that's part of the work that I've been doing, is working with women who maybe didn't get to really live into that ideal postpartum space. And how do we really build practices to regulate, to prioritize regulation, and to build a structure, a system in her life so that she feels like she has some space to, hold herself and allow herself to soften. And it's these principles of the divine feminine, to be soft, to be receptive, to attune to the moment, to navigate chaos. These are all principles of the divine feminine that I feel we're supposed to learn in a healthy wholeness upbringing. And it becomes game time when we're a mom. Those are those feminine skills for a mom are essential to raising the child and having more easefulness in motherhood. And when we haven't had that, it's okay, find a coach, do the shadow work, do the nervous system work, and prioritize yourself, because your well-being, coming full circle here, guys, is you're role modeling that way forward for your child. And so your well-being will impact your child's mental health and emotional health for the rest of their life.
I think you spoke to this some, Jen, already, around thinking creatively and planning, but I'm thinking about the experience of stress and everything beautiful and nourishing and soulful that you just shared, and then its collision into modern life, economic, realities. We talked about ego before, or you talked about, this move for equality. And sometimes we're driven to that by economic necessity. Sometimes it's because of whatever kind of place we want to have in the world or the role we want to play. Can you just specifically speak to when women are encountering that voice and that challenge to engaging in this nourishment, how do they and all of us, how do we sidestep that? How do we actually face those realities and find pathways into actually being able to do this work?
I mean, it's a good question, because it is so vulnerable. It's so vulnerable for a woman to be in that space, because it's especially, it's maybe she can go back to work, but she can't go back to work immediately. Or you know what I mean? There's so much vulnerability of really needing to be able to receive support in that space. And there's a lot of that self-talk in there of I can't trust. I think it comes down to trust, being vulnerable, receiving, is it okay for me to receive, or do I need to receive and be able to give right away? I talk with a lot of mothers about those first couple of years of like where the child's born, it's like really not your season to give. There will be other seasons of your life when you can give, and this is not it right now. And I think, I think that those are like, these are the things that I talk about. Like, these are the shadows. Like, these are the self-talk. Like, well, I can't trust anybody, or I can't. And it's like, I mean, you can try to do it on your own, but you can ask anybody. Everybody kind of talks about, like, it's like, where is the village? It says it takes a village to raise your kids. And it's like, well, where's the village? And you have to, I don't know, make peace with some of this stuff in yourself and be okay with like I think that's where it's like, if you haven't had kids yet, that like maidenhood space to start practicing like receiving help and like just noticing, like, is it uncomfortable? Is there tension? Like, well, what about this, is uncomfortable for me, and starting to work through some of those ego stories, those shadow stories ahead of time. And that doesn't always happen.
I think, Rahul, if you don't mind, I want to ask one other thing, which is, around gender roles. And you're also speaking about being a single parent and going through divorce. I find that for myself, obviously, my son has both his parents in his life right now. But when I'm with him, I'm basically playing the roles of kind of both parents at the same time, right? And you spoke to kind of this sense of in the first 2 years of the relationship of the child with the mother and the man kind of holding the perimeter. How do we, what kind of insights can we extrapolate from this for, first of all, the role that men can play in supporting women as they're going through all of this, but also secondly, where do we find kind of like the mother within ourselves, the man, the father within the mom, and as we're in a world that, kind of increasingly blends and blurs these distinctions, how can we kind of connect with these different elements inside ourselves for our kids' benefit?
I love that. I mean, I guess I'll say I don't know actually how a man would do this, but I'll speak from my experience and my perspective and how I've found like the healthy masculine, I guess. And I'll just say first, it was certainly a journey because it keeps deepening, I guess, too. Because playing both roles is like not my natural design, first of all. So there's been in that journey like some resistance of like, oh, I have to like be more masculine, like hold this space in the way. And I'm like, there are certain things, and I'm like, God, I just wish I had a partner to do that. And what I've found is, it's all right. It's all about wholeness. So like, how is there healthy feminine and masculine in me? Right? Like we all have, again, access to these different parts of ourselves. And so how do we cultivate? And a lot of this can be done through the reparenting of ourselves and through shadow work and through just kind of like unpacking our relationship with our parents too. Like, what was that imprint that we received from them? And how has that informed how we look at the masculine and the feminine? And so, and to do some research, there's tons and tons of research and books and stuff out there about what's healthy masculine and what's healthy feminine. And so connecting with the awareness of what that even looks like, I think is part of it. Part of my journey as a single mother has been, how can I recognize the divine masculine in my life that is external to me, that is like the structure in my life, the other masculine role models in my life, the relationship with money, like there are all these masculine principles, and community. Like I still need to be supported. I still need somebody to run the perimeter sometimes so that I can be held. And so that has been a journey of really feeling into the depth that I need that. And I started with building a community of friends and other families that would really be support. Like, hey, like I need to go and cry in the shower today. Like, can you please take my kid for a little while so that I can do that? You know, I need to be able, like, I needed to be able to be myself and to have that support. And I've more recently, I really examined and really felt into, like, what's the depth of support that I really need to, like, live the life I want. And I moved in with my parents. Like, I'm not equipped, actually. Like, I've been doing it for 5 years and it wasn't serving me personally in the way that I need it. And I cannot tell you, like, how much, like, melting and, like, relaxing it is to have other adults around that love my child and that are supporting, and, you know, just like being able to melt. And that took a lot of shadow work for me to be able to be that vulnerable, to accept that level of support and to ask for that level of support. Oh my God. Because there was also, like, so much pride too. And, like, oh, well, I really got my shit together and I've been doing this all by myself for 5 years. And, you know, like, that lived in me for sure. And it wasn't serving, I think, you know, it wasn't serving me anymore. It served me for, you know, for a season. I think that that's just part of this journey, is, like, doing the best you can with what you can, when you can.
Well, Jen, I just want to pause and you know, look at kind of as we approach end, just share my appreciation for you and just how open you've been about your own story and your own journey through parenting and through the spiritual pathway and what it's looked like for you to find wholeness. Really taking a lot from this. And, you know, I was even searching for a synthesis of everything we've talked about, but I was like, man, we've covered so much ground, you know, from parenting and shadow work and spirituality and practice and learning and vulnerability and, you know, just everything that comes with this process. And yeah, just really want to express appreciation for what you brought to this conversation.
Yeah, thank you both so much for having me. It's been, I love talking about this, and I really want to just share this more with the world, that, like, that this is an option, that this is something that they can think about. This is something that they can seek guides to help deepen in. That there's, like, another way of looking at parenting that is, like, it's catalyzing, and it's not a burden that you have to bear or sacrifice for a certain amount of years. It's actually a thread that gets woven into the strengthening and deepening of the human that you are. And yeah, I just want to welcome more parents to think of it like that. And if they need help, let me know.
So on that note, Jen, as we get ready to close out, I'm curious if there's just any last takeaway, or if there's one thing that you'd like to leave our listeners with, what would that be?
I guess, like, one thing that feels important that maybe we didn't quite say is that no matter how much of a conscious parent you are, or even if you're making the leap of, like, I haven't been conscious and now I want to step in and do and have been inspired and want to do more of this, I truly believe it is part of the human experience to have some level of traumatization to your child. And like you will, like, have to say something, do something that, like, there is no perfect parent, and we're not meant to be. And to just like literally, I just kind of ended with, like, you know, we just do what we can when we can. And the process of looking at these as opportunities to heal and do that work is going to teach your kid that how to move through their own challenges and work through their stuff, and help them know that, and help them actually see and embody that, like, being human is not to be perfect. So
thank you so much. You know, I think as Rahul, as you said, man, a lot of ground covered today. And I hope for folks listening to this that it gives you a lot to reflect on and tools to work with in your own life, whether you're literally a parent, thinking about becoming a parent, or just in the process of reparenting yourself in your ongoing learning journey. And as Jen mentioned, you can reach out to her and contact her directly if you'd like to explore that further with her. And you can find more links to the work that she does in the show description. And of course, as always, if you enjoy listening to us here at Woven Wings Live, please share our work with a friend or leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts, and join our newsletter to follow along on the journey. It's a real pleasure getting to make these podcasts for you all and just get to be part of these amazing conversations. Jen, I just want to thank you again for joining us today. And for all those listening, thanks for tuning in, and we will catch you next time. Take care.